This alternative history scenario begins with a real event that took place off the coast of Cuba on the night of October 27, 1962, but ends very differently. The Soviet submarine B-59 is being tracked by American warships. The Americans are dropping low-powered signaling depth charges into the water, intending to force the submarine to surface. Inside B-59, however, the crew has no way of knowing that the explosives are merely warning signals. Communication with Moscow has been lost. The batteries are nearly exhausted. The ventilation system is failing. The temperature inside the submarine has risen to unbearable levels. The crew has no reliable information about what is happening above the surface. Captain Valentin Savitsky becomes convinced that the war has already begun. He orders the preparation of the submarine's nuclear-tipped torpedo, a weapon with an explosive power comparable to the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. In real history, Flotilla Commander Vasily Arkhipov opposed the launch and prevented the weapon from being fired. In this timeline, his objection fails. At 7:41 p.m., one of B-59's forward torpedo tubes opens. The nuclear torpedo enters the dark Atlantic water and accelerates toward the American formation. Its intended target is the aircraft carrier USS Randolph, positioned behind the destroyers that have been pursuing the Soviet submarine. American sonar operators detect the incoming torpedo, but they assume it carries a conventional warhead. The order to begin evasive maneuvers comes several seconds too late. The explosion occurs only a few hundred meters from the carrier. The sea is torn apart by a blinding white flash. A nuclear fireball forms beneath the surface, instantly vaporizing millions of tons of water. A colossal column rises from the ocean and crashes back down upon the fleet. The flight deck of USS Randolph is ripped open. The carrier's hull bends under the pressure wave. Two nearby destroyers capsize almost immediately. Thousands of American sailors are killed before they understand what has happened. Within minutes, the center of the American naval formation becomes a field of burning wreckage, radioactive spray, and floating debris. The first message sent to Washington contains a phrase that leaves no room for doubt. Nuclear attack. B-59 attempts to dive deeper immediately after firing. The surviving American ships no longer use signaling charges. Real depth bombs, rockets, and torpedoes are launched into the sea. Roughly 20 minutes later, B-59 breaks apart beneath the water and sinks. No one aboard survives. But the destruction of the submarine does not end the crisis. It begins the most catastrophic chain reaction in human history. In Washington, President John F. Kennedy, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, and the senior members of the American Military Command are summoned to an emergency meeting. The first reports are incomplete and contradictory. No one knows whether Moscow directly ordered the attack. No one knows whether the nuclear strike was an isolated decision made by a submarine commander or the opening phase of a coordinated Soviet offensive. The American military assumes the worst. The attack at sea is interpreted as the first step in a wider Soviet operation. Commanders warn that the missiles positioned in Cuba may be launched at any moment. Several generals demand an immediate attack on every known Soviet missile site on the island. Others argue that the United States must strike Soviet territory before Moscow can launch a full nuclear assault. Kennedy refuses to authorize an immediate attack on the Soviet Union. Instead, he orders a massive assault on military targets in Cuba. American aircraft are also given permission to use tactical nuclear weapons if conventional strikes fail to eliminate the missile sites. Washington believes the operation can remain limited. Moscow and Havana interpret it as the beginning of an invasion. Before sunrise on October 28, hundreds of American aircraft take off from bases in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. The first wave attacks Soviet air defenses, communication centers, and missile positions in Cuba with conventional bombs. Several launch sites are destroyed. Others survive. Soviet and Cuban forces return fire. Dozens of American aircraft are shot down. The American base at Guantanamo Bay comes under heavy artillery attack. At the same time, an invasion fleet begins moving toward the Cuban coast. American commanders soon realize that the first wave has not destroyed all of the Soviet nuclear weapons on the island. A second strike is ordered. This time, 2 small nuclear bombs are dropped on missile installations near San Cristobal and Sagua La Grande. Mushroom clouds rise above Cuba. In Havana, people believe the end of the world has arrived. The Soviet command structure on the island begins to collapse. Communication with Moscow becomes unreliable. Commanders are unsure whether they still have the authority to launch the tactical nuclear weapons under their control. When the American invasion fleet approaches the coast, they decide to act. 3 Soviet tactical nuclear weapons are used. One destroys most of the American base at Guantanamo Bay. Another detonates over a naval formation approaching northern Cuba. A third is used against American forces gathering for a landing operation. Thousands of American soldiers and sailors die in seconds. Ships burn across the sea. Radio communication collapses. Radiation warnings are issued across southern Florida. At this point, neither side believes the other is fighting a limited war. In Washington, strategic forces are placed at maximum readiness. American bombers begin flying toward the Soviet Union. Intercontinental ballistic missiles receive their target coordinates. American forces in Europe are ordered to prepare for combat. The Jupiter missiles stationed in Turkey and Italy are placed on immediate launch status. In Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev learns that communication with Soviet units in Cuba has largely disappeared. Images of the American nuclear strikes reach Soviet intelligence. Khrushchev attempts to send an urgent ceasefire message to Washington. But the military communication system is overloaded. Reports contradict one another. Some Soviet commanders claim that American bombers are already entering Soviet airspace. Others report that the missiles in Turkey are being prepared for launch. Inside the Kremlin's underground command center, several generals argue that the Soviet Union will be hit within hours. Khrushchev authorizes what he describes as a limited strike against NATO military installations. But in a nuclear war, the word limited has no real meaning. During the first hours of October 29, Soviet medium-range missiles are launched toward NATO bases in West Germany, Italy, Britain, and Turkey. Bombers take off from bases across Eastern Europe. Soviet submarines in the North Atlantic receive orders to attack American targets. Turkey becomes one of the countries hit hardest outside Central Europe. Military installations around İzmir are struck. Incirlik Air Base is destroyed. Facilities near Sigli and command centers around Ankara are targeted by nuclear weapons. A detonation west of Ankara devastates much of the capital. A significant part of the government is killed. The surviving administration relocates to Konya. A nuclear explosion near İzmir Bay destroys the port and the surrounding industrial districts. Adana and the neighboring provinces are buried beneath radioactive fallout. Istanbul is not directly attacked. The Soviet leadership avoids a strike that could completely block the Bosphorus and turn the Black Sea into a radioactive naval graveyard. Nevertheless, Istanbul is overwhelmed within weeks. Hundreds of thousands of wounded civilians and refugees arrive from western and central Anatolia. The city becomes Turkey's de facto economic and administrative center during the first years after the war. The destruction in Europe is even greater. American air bases and British nuclear facilities are struck across the United Kingdom. Britain responds with its own nuclear forces. Military centers in East and West Germany come under attack almost simultaneously. Explosions occur around Hamburg, Frankfurt, Munich, Leipzig, Dresden, and Berlin. Within hours, both German states cease to function as organized governments. French President Charles de Gaulle attempts to keep France outside the direct exchange by declaring that the French nuclear force operates independently from NATO. His warning fails to protect all French territory. Several NATO facilities in northern and eastern France are struck. Paris survives, but millions of civilians flee from the affected regions. In the United States, the air campaign against Cuba fails to destroy every Soviet missile. Several surviving missiles are launched toward Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and Washington. One malfunctions and falls into the sea. Two are intercepted. The others reach American territory. Miami is largely destroyed. Military facilities around Tampa are struck. An explosion near New Orleans cripples the port and much of the regional oil infrastructure. A missile aimed at Washington drifts away from its intended target, but detonates south of the capital. The White House, Congress, and the Pentagon suffer severe damage. Kennedy survives because he has already been moved to an underground emergency center. Many senior officials do not. The American counterattack can no longer be stopped. Strategic Air Command launches a massive assault against Soviet missile bases, airfields, naval installations, and command centers. Multiple nuclear explosions occur around Moscow. Leningrad, Murmansk, Minsk, Kiev, Sevastopol, Baku, and Vladivostok are heavily attacked. The Soviet Union responds with long-range bombers and its limited force of intercontinental missiles. New York Harbor, Norfolk Naval Base, command facilities in Colorado, and military installations in California are hit. A large share of the Soviet weapons fail because of technical problems, American defenses, and communication breakdowns. This prevents the complete destruction of the United States. It does not prevent the collapse of its political and economic centers. The war lasts approximately 72 hours. By the end of the third day, the command systems on both sides are disintegrating. Missile crews receive conflicting instructions. Some bases no longer receive orders at all. Bombers turn back because of fuel shortages. Several commanders refuse to carry out further strikes. Representatives of France, Sweden, India, and the United Nations use the remaining diplomatic channels to call for an immediate ceasefire. On October 31, 1962, the major nuclear exchanges finally stop. The disaster does not. More than 40 million people died during the first week across North America, Europe, the Soviet Union, and Cuba. Burns, radiation sickness, epidemics, and the collapse of medical systems pushed the death toll above 100 million within several months. Transportation comes to a halt across Central Europe. Electrical grids fail. Hospitals run out of medicine. Millions of survivors leave the cities and move toward rural regions in search of food and uncontaminated water. Smoke and dust lifted into the atmosphere caused temperatures across the northern hemisphere to fall during 1963. Growing seasons become shorter. Agricultural production collapses in Canada, the Soviet territories, Northern Europe, and the northern United States. Large areas of farmland are abandoned because of radioactive contamination. Countries that were never directly attacked also face famine. International trade has disintegrated. Shipments of grain, fertilizer, fuel, and medicine come to an end. Governments ban food exports. Ports are placed under military control. India, China, Indonesia, Egypt, and large parts of Africa face mass starvation. The year 1963 becomes known as the Dark Harvest. In the United States, presidential government is reconstructed under emergency powers. Washington is largely unusable, so federal institutions are divided between Denver, Philadelphia, and Chicago. Kennedy appears in public only rarely. His health is deteriorating, and he remains under constant medical supervision. Martial law is imposed across several states. Military checkpoints are established along major roads and state borders. Millions of people are relocated through compulsory resettlement programs. The political debates and social reform campaigns that would have defined the 1960s are replaced by the struggle for survival. Kennedy is never assassinated in Dallas because the trip never takes place. But he also does not remain the hopeful young leader remembered by another history. He is blamed for failing to prevent the war. In early 1964, he transfers his powers to the vice president because of his declining health. He dies later that year. American society is transformed by Reconstruction. The federal government takes direct control of power stations, railroads, major factories, and agricultural production. Private property and the market economy continue to exist, but permanent emergency planning becomes the foundation of the national system. Large corporations are tied to government reconstruction contracts. Millions of citizens are placed in national service organizations. Racial segregation is also shaken by the war. Black Americans, Latino communities, and the poor face severe discrimination in the first evacuation and aid programs. But the enormous demand for labor makes the old divided system impossible to maintain. In the military, factories, and newly built settlements, people from different communities are forced to work together. The civil rights movement changes its focus. Instead of concentrating mainly on public accommodation and voting rights, it organizes around housing distribution, food access, compensation for radiation victims, and safety conditions for Reconstruction workers. The Reconstruction Equality Act of 1967 bans many forms of discrimination at the federal level. At the same time, state surveillance, censorship, and the authority of security agencies expand dramatically. America becomes more equal, but also more authoritarian. The situation in the Soviet Union is far worse. The destruction of Moscow and the death of much of the senior leadership eliminate the central authority of the Communist Party. For weeks, Khrushchev's fate remains unknown. The government eventually announces that he died in a command center outside Moscow. The Soviet military divides into regional commands. Local administrations in Ukraine, the Baltic republics, the Caucasus, and Central Asia are no longer receiving reliable orders from the center. Railroads are destroyed. Energy networks are broken. The republics begin creating their own food systems, security forces, and emergency governments. By 1964, the Soviet Union still officially exists. In reality, it has become a loose military federation. The administration of the Russian Soviet Republic first moves to Kybyshev and later to Sverdlovsk in the Urals. Ukraine is divided between temporary governments operating from Kharkiv and Lviv. The Baltic republics declare independence. Local governments emerge in Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. In 1967, the Soviet Union is formally dissolved. It is replaced by the Russian Republic, the Ukrainian Republic, a Baltic Federation, the Caucasian Republics, and the Central Asian Union. None of these states possesses the power of the former Soviet Union. Nuclear weapons remain scattered among different military commands. For years, the world lives under the threat of missing warheads, unsecured stockpiles, and uncontrolled units. The collapse of the Soviet system destroys the global prestige of communism. But capitalism is also blamed for bringing humanity to the edge of extinction. The disaster is not interpreted simply as the failure of one ideology. Both superpower systems are seen as centralized structures that placed the survival of humanity beneath military competition. During the second half of the 1960s, a new political movement begins to spread. It becomes known as non-aligned Reconstructionism. India emerges as one of the most important diplomatic centers in the post-war world. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru organizes the Delhi Ceasefire Conference, bringing American and surviving Soviet representatives to the same table. India possesses one of the largest functioning bureaucratic and diplomatic systems among the major countries not directly struck. It becomes the center of international relief coordination. The United Nations headquarters in New York has been badly damaged. The organization moves first to Geneva and later to New Delhi. The structure of the Security Council is challenged. Allowing the states that created the catastrophe to retain permanent veto power is no longer accepted. In 1968, the United Nations is reorganized. An expanded Security Council is created, including the United States, the successor states of the Soviet Union, China, France, Britain, India, Brazil, Japan, and representatives from Africa. The single-state veto is abolished. Military interventions require a qualified majority. The most important institution in the new system is the International Nuclear Control Authority. Nuclear production facilities are open to international inspectors. Warheads are registered. A long process begins to transfer weapons held by unstable governments and regional commanders into internationally supervised storage sites. Nuclear weapons do not disappear. But they are no longer treated as symbols of prestige. Possessing them becomes associated with the possibility of repeating the catastrophe of 1962. Nuclear strategists are no longer presented as guardians of civilization. They are treated as dangerous technicians whose work must be constantly monitored. The political map of Europe is transformed. The border between East and West Germany loses its meaning. Much of Berlin is uninhabitable. Millions of Germans flee toward France, Scandinavia, Spain, Italy, and the Balkans. France, Sweden, and Switzerland become the political centers of post-war Europe. De Gaulle promotes a European system independent of both America and the shattered Soviet world. In 1966, the European Reconstruction Community is established. France, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, Austria, Denmark, Norway, and the reconstructed German regions join the new organization. Its central principle is military neutrality. American and Russian nuclear weapons are banned from European territory. National armies are reduced. Border security is transferred to a common European constabulary. Britain initially remains outside this system. The destruction around London and the collapse of the British economy accelerate the end of the country's remaining imperial influence. The British government creates a special reconstruction partnership with Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. By the 1970s, Britain also joins the European system. European nationalism does not disappear. In the first years after the war, refugees face violent attacks. Border disputes and food riots become common. But no state possesses the resources to rebuild on its own. Energy, water, housing, and transportation must be managed collectively. European integration is born not from prosperity, but from necessity. In 1978, the European Neutral Union is founded. Its capital is not Paris, but Geneva. Its flag does not contain stars. Instead, it displays broken rings joined together, representing a continent reconstructed from its own ruins. Turkey experiences a severe political crisis during the first post-war years. The destruction of Ankara, the loss of large sections of the military and bureaucracy, and the collapse of transportation networks weaken the central administration. A temporary government is established in Konya. Istanbul, Bursa, Eskişehir, Kayseri, Samsun, and Gaziantep create regional reconstruction councils. Turkey's membership in NATO effectively ends. NATO itself has lost its purpose after the nuclear devastation of Europe. Public anger in Turkey turns against both the United States and the Soviet Union. Foreign military bases that made the country a target are closed. The passage of vessels carrying nuclear weapons through the Turkish Straits is permanently prohibited. The Neutrality and National Reconstruction Constitution of 1965 declares that Turkey will never again join a military bloc. Istanbul becomes the economic center of the country, while Konya remains the new administrative capital. Ankara is gradually cleared and partially rebuilt, but the center of the old capital is preserved as an international memorial zone for the victims of nuclear war. Turkey's geographical position gives it enormous strategic importance in the post-war era. Its ports, railways, and agricultural regions become essential links between Europe, the Black Sea, and the Middle East. The ports of Istanbul and Samsun become major centers for grain and relief shipments moving toward Europe. The weakening of the central government also changes Turkey's internal administrative structure. Local governments receive broader financial and administrative powers. Regional reconstruction authorities are established around Istanbul, Konya, Samsun, Kayseri, Gaziantep, and Erzurum. These institutions become responsible for food distribution, energy production, transportation, healthcare, and local security. The central government gradually regains its strength, but the rigid bureaucratic structure of the pre-war period never fully returns. Turkey develops a more flexible administrative model in which a strong national government operates together with powerful local authorities. From the 1980s onward, Turkey becomes one of the central states of the Mediterranean neutrality zone. Together with Greece, Yugoslavia, Egypt, and Italy, it creates a non-military regional security system. Disputes in the Aegean Sea continue, but the memory of 1962 prevents any government from risking a major war. The Middle East also develops along a different path. The collapse of American and Soviet influence forces regional states to construct their own security arrangements. Israel loses its most important external supporter. Arab governments lose access to Soviet weapons, advisors, and financial assistance. The major Arab-Israeli War of 1967 does not occur in the same form. Instead, Egypt, Syria, and Israel engage in months of border clashes. None of the participants has the fuel, spare parts, or external support required for a large conventional campaign. India, Turkey, and France mediate the Cairo ceasefire of 1969. The Palestinian issue remains unresolved. It becomes one of the central political questions of the new international system. A limited Palestinian administration is established in the West Bank during the 1970s. Jerusalem is declared a shared capital under international supervision. Violence continues periodically, but the city never falls completely under the control of a single state. The oil-producing Arab countries rise rapidly in the post-war economy. Europe and Asia require enormous amounts of energy for reconstruction. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and the Gulf Emirates become extremely wealthy. Without an American security umbrella, however, these states devote more of their income to regional agreements, infrastructure, and independent defense. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 never occurs in the same form. The Shah loses American support and begins weakening much earlier. In 1972, military officers, religious leaders, nationalists, and left-wing movements create a broad coalition. The monarchy is abolished. Iran becomes a neutral republic. Political conflict continues, but no single religious leadership establishes absolute control. Ba'athist movements gain influence in Iraq and Syria, but without Soviet support they cannot dominate the region. The Iran-Iraq War never takes place. Instead, the Persian Gulf experiences repeated border crises and short military confrontations. Decolonization accelerates across Africa. European governments no longer possess the military or economic power required to maintain overseas empires. Algeria, Angola, Mozambique, Kenya, and other territories gain independence earlier. Independence does not automatically create stability. Power struggles, ethnic tensions, and colonial borders remain. But without direct American and Soviet involvement, fewer local conflicts become global proxy wars. Africa still experiences coups, civil wars, and famines. The difference is that these conflicts are less frequently transformed into ideological battlegrounds between rival superpowers. The African Reconstruction Union is created in 1975. Instead of attempting to redraw every colonial border, it concentrates on shared railway networks, energy projects, and continental food reserves. The apartheid regime in South Africa loses much of its Western support. Economic sanctions and internal resistance bring the system to an end during the early 1980s. Latin America is deeply affected by the destruction of Cuba. Havana and Western Cuba are devastated. Fidel Castro dies during the first days of the war. The surviving Cuban government retreats toward the eastern part of the island. The Cuban Revolution becomes both a symbol of resistance and a warning against superpower confrontation. The reduced American ability to intervene gives Latin American states greater political freedom. Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina become major regional powers. Many military coups and covert operations backed by Washington never occur. The continent's political development becomes less militarized. Salvador Allende is not overthrown in Chile. His government creates a neutral economic model combining socialist planning with private ownership. This system influences reform movements across Latin America. Electoral socialism grows stronger than armed revolution. Brazil becomes the leading state of the South Atlantic during the 1980s. It refuses to develop nuclear weapons and invests heavily in hydroelectric energy, biofuels, and solar power. The Latin American community is founded in 1990, creating a common market and a regional security system that excludes nuclear weapons. The greatest long-term change in Asia is the rise of China. The People's Republic of China is not directly involved in the nuclear exchange. The collapse of the Soviet Union removes the major military threat on its northern border. The destruction of Western industrial centers creates an enormous demand for Chinese labor and manufacturing. China also suffers severely. The collapse of global trade, agricultural failure, and the continuing domestic famine kill millions. Mao Zedong describes the catastrophe as the joint suicide of capitalist and Soviet imperialism. China presents itself as the new center of human civilization. Mao's power initially increases. But extreme centralization and failed agricultural policies slow the country's recovery. A major internal struggle begins in 1968. The Cultural Revolution never develops into the same level of nationwide chaos. The army and officials around Zhou Enlai limit Mao's authority to prevent complete collapse. During the 1970s, China begins controlled economic reforms. Rather than opening itself primarily to Western private investment, it creates state-led industrial partnerships with Japan, India, and Southeast Asia. Chinese factories initially produce railway equipment, agricultural machinery, generators, and prefabricated housing rather than consumer goods. Japan is not directly destroyed, though American bases in the country are attacked and several regions suffer heavy losses. Having already experienced Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japanese society becomes the leading force in the international disarmament movement. The decline of American influence allows Japan to develop an independent foreign policy. The anti-war provisions of its constitution are expanded. Instead of building a large military, Japan invests in electronics, medicine, robotics, and disaster response technology. By the 1980s, the Tokyo-Osaka corridor becomes the world's most advanced center of civilian technology. On the Korean peninsula, North Korea loses Soviet support while South Korea loses American protection. Both governments face economic collapse. With Chinese mediation, the Korean Confederation is established in 1974. The two governments remain separate for a time, but the border gradually opens. By the 1990s, Korea has become a neutral, unified industrial state. The Vietnam War never takes place in its historical form. The United States has no ability to send hundreds of thousands of soldiers. France withdraws completely. The conflict between North and South Vietnam ends quickly. The country is unified under Northern leadership in 1966. The years of mass bombing and the enormous American ground war never occur. As a result, global youth culture in the 1960s also develops differently. The great anti-Vietnam protest movements are replaced by campaigns against nuclear weapons, military governments, and compulsory reconstruction service. The generation born after the war becomes known as the Siren children. They grow up with evacuation drills, radiation measurements, food rationing, and stories of lost cities. The idea that civilization could end within a few hours becomes part of everyday life. Family structures change. Millions of orphans are raised by state institutions, local communities, and collective households. Traditional families merge with groups of refugees. Shared kitchens, common energy systems, and collective childcare become normal in many rebuilt cities. Religious movements are also transformed. Some groups interpret the war as the beginning of the apocalypse. Others describe nuclear weapons as the greatest crime humanity has committed against divine creation. Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, Muslim, Buddhist, and Hindu leaders issue a joint declaration on the preservation of humanity. Interfaith meetings are held in Rome, Istanbul, Jerusalem, Delhi, and Kyoto. They do not eliminate religious conflict, but they turn opposition to nuclear war into a universal moral principle. Art and culture become darker. Cinema focuses on destroyed cities, radiation victims, underground shelters, and separated families. Stories of victory and national glory are replaced by themes of survival, guilt, and memory. Science fiction no longer concentrates mainly on distant planets. It imagines the reconstruction of Earth. Rock music still develops, but it becomes less connected to carefree rebellion. It becomes the sound of collective mourning and anti-war resistance. Because London's cultural institutions have been damaged, much of the British music industry moves toward Manchester, Liverpool, and Dublin. In the United States, Memphis, Nashville, and San Francisco become major cultural centers. Television expands as the main tool used by governments to distribute Reconstruction information. During the early years, broadcasting remains heavily controlled. Independent regional networks later appear. Because the images of the nuclear war are repeatedly shown, humanity develops a shared visual memory of the disaster. The space race ends. The American moon program is cancelled. The Soviet space program breaks apart with the Soviet state. Reaching the moon is no longer treated as a project of national prestige. Rocket technology is associated with nuclear destruction and public suspicion. Yet the need for weather, communication, and agricultural satellites remains. In 1973, Japan, France, India, and the United States established the International Orbital Authority. The first common satellites are used to monitor radioactive zones, harvest failures, and global weather systems. Human beings reached the moon only in 1988. The mission does not carry the flag of a single country. Its crew includes American, French, Indian, and Japanese astronauts. The symbol placed on the lunar surface is an image of Earth inside a blue circle. The first message is not about conquest. It is about survival. We came here not to prove which nation is stronger, but to remember that Earth is one home. Computer technology also follows a different path. Many American military research networks are damaged or destroyed. The computer revolution develops through separate centers in Japan, Sweden, France, India, and California. The vulnerability of centralized communication during the war creates demand for distributed networks. During the late 1970s, hospitals, universities, and disaster centers begin connecting through resilient civilian data systems. In 1986, the Geneva Protocol Network enters service. Computer systems in different countries begin using common standards. Its founding principle is that no government must be able to control all communication. Personal identity and private correspondence are protected through international agreements. The Internet of this timeline grows more slowly, but it is treated as public infrastructure from the beginning. Large technology companies still emerge, but they never gain ownership over the basic global network. Personal data is not treated as a commercial product. Advertising-based social media never achieves complete global dominance. Energy policy becomes one of the most permanent consequences of the war. The word nuclear creates widespread fear. The construction of civilian nuclear power stations slows dramatically. Many states cancel their atomic energy programs. During the first Reconstruction years, coal and oil consumption increases because few alternatives are available. By the 1970s, air pollution and dependence on oil become severe problems. Japan, Brazil, India, and the European Neutral Union begin investing in solar, wind, geothermal, and biofuel technologies. Solar panels enter mass production during the 1980s. Electric public transport and high-speed rail limit the growth of automobile-centered cities. In the United States, regional rail networks receive more investment than large highway systems. Oil becomes too expensive and politically dangerous to support unlimited private car use. Reconstructed cities are denser, more dependent on public transportation, and connected to underground shelter systems. Environmentalism begins as a security doctrine rather than a lifestyle movement. Radiation, contaminated water, and poisoned soil have demonstrated that environmental damage cannot be contained by national borders. Governments that hide environmental data are treated as threats to international security. The World Atmosphere Treaty is signed in 1982. It places industrial emissions and radioactive waste under international supervision. Climate change becomes a central political issue before the 1990s. Fossil fuel use still causes serious warming. But the transition toward renewable energy begins roughly 2 decades earlier than it otherwise would have. By the 1980s, the world is no longer divided into 2 blocks. 5 major power centers emerge. The North American Reconstruction Union, the European Neutral Union, the East Asian Cooperation Zone led by China, the Delhi Partnership led by India, and the Latin American community centered on Brazil and Mexico. None of them becomes as dominant as the pre-war United States or Soviet Union. The international system is multipolar and unstable. Fear of another catastrophe prevents direct war between the largest powers. Economic competition, espionage, and regional conflict continue. The United States signs common energy and defense agreements with Canada during the late 1970s. Mexico does not become a full member, but joins the trade system. Because Washington is never fully restored, Denver becomes the permanent federal capital. The ruins of the old capital are preserved as a museum and memorial to the nuclear war. Presidential power is reduced during the 1980s. The emergency security state created after 1962 is weakened by mass protest. Intelligence agencies are placed under boards composed of congressional and state representatives. The United States remains a major cultural and economic power. It no longer determines the entire global order. The dollar loses its position as the single reserve currency. International trade uses a basket consisting of the dollar, the European accounting unit, the Japanese yen, the Indian rupee, and gold-backed settlement certificates. Russia struggles for decades. Many regions west of the Urals are empty because of radiation and infrastructure collapse. Siberian cities become the new economic centers. Novosibirsk becomes the Russian capital. Although Russia controls enormous energy resources, population loss and political fragmentation prevent it from recovering its former strength. During the 1990s, Russia, Ukraine, and the Caucasian states create an economic union. Its purpose is not to recreate the Soviet Union. Its goals are to control nuclear depots, repair railways, and regulate energy trade. Russian nationalism periodically grows stronger. Some movements describe the war as the result of American aggression and demand the reunification of former Soviet territories. But the living memory of the disaster prevents a large expansionist movement from taking permanent power. China becomes one of the world's largest economies during the 1990s. However, global manufacturing does not become concentrated entirely within China. Japan, India, Korea, Brazil, and the European states remain strong industrial centers. The global economy is therefore less dependent on a single production chain. China retains one-party rule. Economic freedom expands while political opposition remains limited. Large student demonstrations take place in Beijing in 1989. The government does not respond with complete military suppression. It announces limited reforms, partly because the post-1962 international system automatically imposes economic sanctions against large-scale state violence. At the beginning of the 21st century, the world still carries the scars of 1962. Large exclusion zones remain in Central Europe, Western Russia, Cuba, Turkey, and parts of the United States. Some areas are open only to scientists and specially authorized personnel. Cuba is administered in 2 major zones. Havana and parts of western Cuba remain closed for decades. The Cuban Republic is established around Santiago in the east. It is neither a communist one-party state nor an American-controlled government. Cuba becomes the international center of nuclear remembrance. Every year on October 27th, the world observes the Day of Silence. At 7:41 p.m., public transportation stops. Television and network broadcasts are interrupted. Sirens sound in cities around the world for 3 minutes. People remember the exact moment when the torpedo was fired from B-59. In schools, the nuclear war is not taught only as military history. Students study communication failures, propaganda, command structures, political psychology, and individual responsibility. They learn that the event which nearly destroyed civilization was not the result of a carefully designed global strategy. It began with fear inside a damaged submarine cut off from the outside world. The September 11th attacks never occur on the same scale. The political structure of the Middle East, the reduced American military presence, and the different development of extremist movements prevent global jihadist networks from gaining the same strength. Terrorism does not disappear. Instead, nuclear smuggling and abandoned Soviet warheads become the main security threats of the 1990s and early 2000s. In 2003, authorities discover that a criminal organization in the Caucasus has acquired radioactive material from an abandoned Soviet storage site and is preparing a dirty bomb. The discovery causes global panic. Afterward, every nuclear depot is placed under biometric and satellite surveillance. War has not disappeared. It has changed form. Great powers avoid direct conflict. They compete through economic sanctions, cyber attacks, local militias, intelligence operations, and unmanned systems. The main lesson humanity learns from nuclear war is not how to create permanent peace. It is how to keep conflict below the level of global extinction. By 2026, the world population remains significantly lower than in another timeline. The mass deaths of the 1960s, the long-term effects of radiation and reduced birth rates have permanently changed global demographics. The Northern Hemisphere has an older population. Africa, South Asia, and Latin America have much younger societies. Migration remains one of the central political issues. People are displaced not only by poverty or war, but by old fallout zones, expanding deserts, and climate change. International law has recognized the category of environmental refugee since the 1980s. The most powerful city in the world is no longer Washington, Moscow, or London. Diplomacy is concentrated in New Delhi and Geneva. Finance is divided between Zurich, Tokyo, Shanghai, and Sao Paulo. Technology is centered in Osaka, Bengaluru, Stockholm, and coastal California. Istanbul has become one of the most important centers of trade and diplomacy connecting Europe, the Black Sea, the Caucasus, and the Middle East. Turkey's administrative capital remains in Konya. Istanbul is the center of international commerce. İzmir has been rebuilt as the heart of the Aegean economy. Ankara remains the center of global nuclear remembrance. The former attack zone around Incirlik has been converted into a vast solar energy and atmospheric research region. Where nuclear bombers once took off, international peace academies and climate observatories now stand. Global politics remains divided between state sovereignty and international control. The International Nuclear Control Authority can inspect military installations without advance warning. Some states consider this essential for human survival. Others describe it as a new form of domination by international institutions. Humanity has not forgotten the disaster of 1962. But every generation grows more distant from it. As the final witnesses die, movements begin to appear that once again describe nuclear weapons as legitimate instruments of national defense. China, France, the North American Union, and India maintain limited nuclear deterrent forces. Russia demands the return of several warheads stored under international control. At a major conference in Geneva in 2024, delegates debate the complete abolition of nuclear weapons. Smaller countries and states devastated in 1962 demand a total ban. The major powers argue that no inspection system can provide absolute security. The conference ends without an agreement. 64 years after the war, humanity is still facing the same question. Will security be based on mutual fear? Or can it be protected by a system that no single country controls? In this world, there is no winner of the Cold War. America did not win. The Soviet Union was not defeated in a conventional sense. It disintegrated. Europe united, but it did so over the ashes of its cities. China rose, but never achieved global domination. India became a diplomatic center, but continued to struggle with poverty and population pressure. Turkey became neutral, strategically important and regionally influential. But it paid for that position with the destruction of Ankara, İzmir, and Adana, and with the lives of hundreds of thousands of its citizens. Humanity reached space later. The world connected to the internet more slowly. Economic development lost several decades. But environmental danger, nuclear risk and global interdependence were recognized much earlier. The world was forced to become cautious before it became fully technological. Shelter signs are still visible in modern cities. Radiation filters are standard equipment in public buildings. No national leader is allowed to order a nuclear attack alone. Submarine commanders cannot launch nuclear weapons after losing communication with their governments. Every warhead requires approval from multiple national and international authorities. All of these systems are the legacy of one night. On October 27, 1962, inside a submarine beneath the dark waters of the Atlantic, a small group of officers did not know whether the war outside had already begun. They heard explosions against the hull. They saw the temperature rising. They felt the air disappearing. Their entire world had been reduced to a metal chamber beneath the sea. The order given in that chamber changed the borders of nations. It destroyed capitals. It divided empires. It left millions of children without families. It changed technology, religion, architecture, politics, and the human understanding of the future. In real history, the world stepped back from an invisible line that night. In this history, the torpedo was fired. And humanity never again became as confident as it had been before the nuclear age.